Yeah, got the recording. So welcome everyone to our latest webinar, Hiring Rights and Managing Probation in the New Unfair Dismissal Landscape. I'm Ali Grady, co-founder and director of the Thrive team. We're a talent acquisition and people development company. And at our core, we believe that when people feel psychologically safe, included and valued, they don't just survive, they thrive. Through our expert search and selection, coaching and training, we help individuals and organisations build resilience, foster connections and thrive both personally and professionally. Thank you for joining today's session, Hiring Right and Managing Probation in the New Unfair Dismissal Landscape. I'm delighted to be joined by Martin Grady, MD of the Thrive team, and to welcome back Richard Hiron, aka the Hironator, Employment Law Specialist. Martin, do you just want to say a few words about yourself by way of introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. Martin Grady. So my background is I was in the Royal Navy for 12 years. And when I came out of the Navy, I applied to be the PA to the head of HR at IBM in Portsmouth. And that was run by Manpower at the time, a recruitment business. And halfway through that interview, they said, you fancy a job in recruitment? And I said, well, what's recruitment? I had no idea what recruitment was. I haven't spent that long in the Navy. So for the last 27 years, I've been developing a career in recruitment. So I've worked for some of the big local agencies down here on the South Coast, Match Tech and ARM. But for the last 12 years or so, I've worked for myself, mainly in exec search, but also hiring difficult to find engineers across defence and engineering. But during that time, I've also been lucky enough to work in-house for a couple of organisations. So I was down at Ricardo in Shoreham for a while, where I did a full-on HR manager role. And then one of my other in-house roles was with Nature's Way Foods. So I had some interesting challenges in the last 27 years. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of recruitment and probations, etc. So I'm hoping we can share some of that, probably too strong to call it wisdom, or certainly lessons learned over the last 27 years or so. But thank you very much for attending today.
Thanks, Martin. And Richard, over to you to say a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure how I follow that, but basically, I'm the employment solicitor in the room. So, to explain what I do, a lot of people think of employment solicitors as somebody who disappears off to a tribunal in a powdered wig or something like that. And it's entirely not the case. So, what I tend to do is I work with organizations and individuals on trying to avoid the employment tribunal because, funnily enough, despite all of the changes that the government brings in from time to time, the tribunal actually wants people to work together and resolve their differences without going to the tribunal in the first place. So I structure my business around that. So particularly with organisations, I'll be helping them to try and avoid the employment tribunal, or if they have to go to the employment tribunal, they'll have gone through a process where they have essentially built up the evidence that they need to defend themselves against a tribunal claim. So I was going to say everybody's a winner, but everybody is not a winner. It's just literally, it makes the process easier for them and more understandable.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. We've had another couple of people join us, so welcome. We're just doing the introductions. So we hope that you'll get involved in today's session in whatever way that feels comfortable for you. Please do ask questions as they come up. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and managing the slides, which means Martin and Richard will be able to just focus on sharing their knowledge and expertise. So feel free to raise your hand using the reactions button or drop any comments into the chat and we'll do our best to pick those up, and there will be time at the end for any questions. Thank you to those that sent questions in advance. We have built the presentation to automatically hopefully answer those questions for you, but if we don't, there'll be that opportunity. This webinar is being recorded. A copy will be made available to you after the event, and for those of you attending live today, you'll also receive a copy of the slides at the end and a comprehensive handout from Richard. So we will get going. Let me just pop up the next slide. So this is what we're going to be covering today. Today's really about connecting the dots. We're going to start with recruitment because obviously that's where any probation period normally starts, at the recruitment stage. And it's also where many of the problems actually begin, or the problems that may occur later. So then we're going to look at probation and how that's managed in practice. And Richard is going to take us through what happens legally when things don't go to plan. So, Martin, over to you.
Oh, okay, excellent. So we're going to start with a poll, actually. It's very simple. It's looking at a slide there. So how confident are you in your current recruitment and probation process? So 4 answers there. I won't read them out, but it'd be good just to get an idea what you currently think. If you're not actually in recruitment at the moment or not responsible for recruiting at the moment, just think back of a previous role and what were the processes like in those roles. Answers on a postcard, please. We can't say that anymore. We don't need to say that anymore, do we?
I don't think anyone sends postcards these days.
No, no, it's not.
But you can do electronic ones, can't
Yeah,
you? I guess.
it's cool.
Yeah. So I'm gonna. I think probably everyone has polled if they're going to. So we'll share the results there. So what we've got is 75% somewhat confident, works well overall with a few areas to improve. And then we've got not very confident and not confident at all. So,
Okay.
so I should have shared the results there so you can see. So, Martin, perhaps that's what you might have expected.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, obviously it's quite I would imagine quite a small poll, but yeah, that's good to see that 75% of people are confident. What I would like to add at this point is if anybody does want to talk to me or Ali at the end of this session, please feel free to get in touch. We're delighted to talk through process, etc. We could easily set up a half an hour, 45-minute call and just talk through any kind of process that you're currently working to. So very happy to do that. Okay, this next slide, please. Okay, so why does this matter now? So Rich is going to cover this off in much more detail, but the key change is that the window before someone can bring an unfair dismissal claim is reducing significantly. So from the 1st of January next year, 2027, employees with at least 6 months continuous service with their employer will be able to claim unfair dismissal. So it's a big shift. So what this actually means in practice is clearly you've got less time to make the right call. Probation is no longer a low risk period. It's where the risk actually sits, or that's how we see it anyway. So this really does mean that the recruitment process is absolutely key in trying to avoid any unfair dismissal claims later on. So the real risk then, most issues obviously don't start at dismissal, they start much earlier. So one of the biggest misconceptions is that unfair dismissal start at the point of dismissal. Well, in reality, it's not the case. It starts much earlier. It starts with the hiring decision. It starts with unclear expectations and things that aren't addressed early enough. Within the probationary period, but I would also take this right back to the beginning of the recruitment process as well. Okay, so when hiring goes wrong, what we see time and time again is this, and I'm sure people on this call have all got experience of this. Hiring is often rushed. I would always recommend taking time to get through the process, but every time I've taken a brief, pretty much 95% of the time I've taken a brief for a role, they want the person to have started yesterday. So it's often working through a rush process. People do rely on instinct with that whole gut feel thing. Roles aren't clearly defined, and sometimes a role is oversold. I wish I had £1 for every time I spoke to somebody that said, it's not the role I was told, Martin. That's why they're looking to leave an organisation early, within 6 to 12 months, sometimes even earlier than that. So the early warning signs can't be ignored, and often we've all been guilty, I'm sure. So let's just give it a bit more time. Well, actually, it's much better to hit these things head on and deal with any issues early in the process. Okay. I'm not sure how open people would like to be with this, but another question is, have you ever known early on in a hire wasn't right, but hoped it would improve? Is anybody brave enough to say anything about this? Or have any examples, perhaps, of when hiring has gone wrong? I've got loads. Obviously not people I've supplied, but I've seen it. I've seen it
Other
many times
intakes and
before.
stuff.
Yeah.
You quite often see it where they haven't even engaged with HR. The first time you know about it is when they actually say, oh, we met someone at a conference or an exhibition and we've been interviewing them and we want to offer them the job. So
Oh
can
yeah.
you sort that out? And it's just like, come on, guys.
Yeah, that's a really good example, isn't it? Again, we've seen that quite a lot, Wendy.
No,
I
no
would say,
process at all.
yeah.
Yeah.
If
There's
you've got it in on the interviews, all they're talking about when they're having these conversations is who they know in a particular industry, not what the skill set is that the individual has or their background.
Yeah, and then you've really got no chance of being able to support a really good onboarding process, probationary period set up properly, etc. Have you? And often in those cases, there's nothing to measure against either. There's no role description, job description, whatever you might say. Yeah, no, that's a great example. Anybody else? I'm happy to move on.
I've definitely got some as well. And when you are actually trying to just get through the onboarding and administration, so before the start date as well, and they're taking days or even weeks to respond to emails, you kind of think, how engaged are you in this process at all? And then, when people start, sort of being late early on and all those little sort of signs that perhaps it's not going to go so well. Richard, did you want to say something?
I've got one. It's topical at the moment. I won't name names, but literally someone was given a job because their employer said they felt sorry for them. And
Oh,
it's such a human instinct, but it's not the right hiring instinct.
yeah.
Yeah, got to be right fit, hasn't it? Yeah.
I've seen that a few times, Richard. Yeah. Okay. So moving on then. So what does good look recruitment actually look like? Well, for me, recruitment is a very simple process, or should be a very simple process. Um, it's not about overcomplication or overcomplicating things. It's about clarity. It's about being consistent, and more importantly, it's about being honest. Very, very honest with everybody in the process as well. And if somebody isn't quite right, don't hire them. I think that's really important. But we have got there that, especially these days, gone are the days, thankfully, of big hopefully, big interview panels, people being put under lots of pressure. You know, it's very much a two-way conversation. And I do believe that interviews these days should be conversational. Clearly, you've got to put some structure into it for sure, but it's always best. You get the most out and best out of people by having open, honest conversations. And you can't hide anything then either.
Uh, and I think hiring managers and HR, and I say this as an ex HR professional, can often forget that actually the candidate is interviewing you as
Yeah.
well. They're making a choice about whether they want to work for you. But I've certainly worked in places where it's felt very one way. So that two-way conversation piece is really important.
On the next slide, what I've done is I've put up one of our processes. So this is where we've been acting as an in-house partner, rather than as a headhunter. And we've run this process for a couple of organisations now. A couple of hundred people have been through this process. So there's a lot of detail here, but it is a Janet and John version of a recruitment process because, like I say, I believe in simplicity. But I think some key parts of this are right at the very beginning of the process is working out exactly what the role is and confirming what you need in the job description. It's not just about looking for another Joe Bloggs or Mary Blythe or whoever it might be. It's about genuinely working out what is the hire, what is it that we need, what are the roles and responsibilities for the role. I think that's absolutely key. So communication right at the beginning of the process is really important. So as the hiring manager gets approval, generally they tend to write a job description, they review whoever's responsible for talent acquisition. But I think it's also the responsibility of the TA person or the HR or whoever it might be to really question the hiring manager about, is this really what you need? And it's worth spending time doing that before you start going through the financial approval, etc. So I'm not going to go through this line by line, but I think briefing, talent acquisition, if you're going to recruit internally, obviously being open and honest with internal candidates, what the role looks like. But if you're also then going to go on to use agencies, it's about briefing the agencies well. So it's not just a question of sending out a job description and say, can you go and find me one of these, please? It's about half an hour, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever, on the phone, depending on the level of the role, really briefing the agencies on what you're looking for and being true to that, or as true to that as you can throughout the process. And then as you get into the shortlisting of the candidates to interview for the hiring manager, again, it's having the criteria really clear what you're looking for and then sticking to that criteria. We all know that's perfect case scenario. You want to find 100% match, etc. But those people generally aren't there. So it's where can you slide up and down in what you're actually required in a role. So it's about really 3 or 4 bullseye things that you're looking for, and then other things around it sliding around a bit. But again, don't rush the process. Have really good interviews all the way through the process. Debrief after the interviews. Debrief with the candidates after the interviews as well. Make sure that once they've gone away, had time to think about it, are they clear on what their expectations are, etc. So again, I'm happy to talk with offline about this, but that's just a really nice, simple process to work through. But it's all about communication all the way through the process. Okay. Any questions on that? Please feel free to ask by all means. But again, we can always come back to it if we need to. So the next part of this is, defining success early. So this is just really going back to what we've just been talking about with when you're talking through the hiring manager, what does success look like? What we're looking for at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. This is part of the recruitment process, but it's also rolling forward into the probationary period as well. I think it's good to be planning right at the very beginning, but as important, what are the non-negotiables as well? So what you're trying to rule out is any vagueness. Be really, really clear on what you're looking for. But what does good performance look like within those first 3 months? And obviously with the new roles, probably extending that towards the first 6 months as well. I think that's really important to get that clarity. And the sooner you do that within the process, the better. It's really difficult to manage later in the process. We all know that. It's good to perhaps put a 90-day plan in place, but this is all part of defining the role and discussions at interview as well, and being open, honest with the candidates as well. Okay. But it's always good to not just rely on interview questions. This gets away from the gut feeling as well. So putting some kind of assessment in play is always really good. So whether that's a psychometric, whether that's some kind of scenario-based assessment, scenario-based questions, real-life examples, testing how somebody thinks It's not just about how they present. This morning, I did a debrief after some interview yesterday, and actually they started talking about, oh, well, this particular candidate presented much better than the rest. But actually, when we started questioning them about their answers, he wasn't the right candidate. But because he presented really well, they were going to take him through to the next stage. I'm not saying he should be exclusive at that point, but it's just like really digging in below the surface of that really good presentation. So also this helps being inclusive as well. Whatever you need to be thinking about, but perhaps around neurodiversity. Neurodivergent people are not necessarily the best presenters, but they've got some fantastic skills for a lot of the roles. You can't select purely on assessment results, so that's really key as well. So what you're trying to do is build up a really big 360 picture, and the more tools and interviews that you put in place, the better. So what I'm saying is use all the tools available to you.
Martin, can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
When I've used assessment tools in the past,
Yeah.
I struggle to get managers to move away from what those results are. They kind of they start seeing in black and white. What do you do to get around that?
I don't give them to the managers. I use it, to be honest, I've seen that a lot as well. But I introduce the results of psychometric actually after the interview. And then we use them perhaps a little bit more in the second stage interview. But it really it backs up what either backs up, so it confirms or denies what they're saying. So it's a useful tool for that. But certainly psychometrics that we use, we tend to use mental toughness and a leadership assessment as well for our more senior roles. So that's what we tend to do.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to hide anything from anybody, but what I want them to do is have a really good conversational interview with somebody in the first place, and then we bring it in later.
Yeah, I try to get them to think about it as an opportunity to think differently about the questions you're going to ask.
Yeah.
Particularly with less experienced managers, it's very difficult.
It really is, especially with engineers, isn't it? Because they're looking at results and they like to see that. But I think if you bring it in between the first and second interview as well, that's a great time to do it, because you can then put that structure into the second interview and you're not just asking the same things. And again, be open with the people that you interview and say, this is what the psychometric is bringing out, and then ask questions around it. I think that's always good to do as well, so everybody knows where they're coming from. Have you shared psychometrics with candidates in the past, Wendy?
I do after the process.
Yeah, okay.
When I go through it with them.
I do tend to debrief as well. I agree. Okay. So this is a big one. If I think I've probably said this a few times now, but if expectations aren't clear at the start, they're very hard to enforce later. So that's often where things start to unravel. Being honest up front actually reduces any risk later on. So it's absolutely key. So that you've got your hiring, you've done your hiring, you've made the offer, they've accepted the offer, and we're coming towards probation now. So looking for the onboarding. So getting again back to clarity, clear objectives, regular check-ins, early conversations. So whether a probation period is 90 days or 6 months, it doesn't matter. I think setting expectations out early is absolutely key. Definitely not just reviewing at the end. But again, time and time again, we see this happening. Last night, just in preparation for this, I actually used Copilot to write a plan for a probationary period plan for the first 90 days for a project manager. It's a job description that we've recently been working on, but I thought for a bit of fun, see what Copilot did. It came up with a fantastic 90-day plan. So first 80 days, here's the objectives. This is how we're going to measure next 60 days, 90 days. And at the end of it, I asked it to develop an assessment process as well. So really simple. It took 3 minutes to come up with a really, really good plan for probation. So it's definitely worth using perhaps some AI, if you haven't already got processes in place, to actually enable you to have a really strong probationary period, I'd highly recommend it, having a look at it. I don't mean to be controversial there, because we're all, clearly professional in what we do, and I'm sure we've got great processes, but it was absolutely fantastic. I was amazed with what it came up with. So the next slide, please. So the biggest mistake in probation is definitely, we see this regularly, I'm sure Richard has seen this many times before, is waiting too long to have those difficult conversations. Nobody likes having difficult conversations, and hopefully if you plan probationary well and you are monitoring, at the end of 30, 60 days, whatever it might be, there should never be a reason to have a difficult conversation, because there should be clarity, there should be objectives set, and it should be really clear what you're looking for. But when you get to month 5, or even worse, oh God, it's probation time. What are we going to do? It's 6 months now, whatever it might be. And then you look back and go, yeah, that person's not great. And you're delivering a message, and the individual has not any clue whatsoever at what you're looking at. The average recruitment costs are around 30k. So that's not paying anybody's fees. That's actually the cost of the business in the recruitment process. So that alone is a good reason not to wait until month 5 or 6. But also, you want to be human, don't you, with all your employees, and having clear objectives, like I keep saying, is so key.
I'm just going to put a pitch in here for our next webinar as well, which is about honest performance conversations. That's on the 7th of July. But I think it just, as Martin said, no one likes having those conversations. So that's going to be the topic of our next webinar.
So we're going to do a poll next. So interesting to see what people's opinions are. So when do you typically address performance concerns? So again, it's fairly simple. Immediately during regular check-ins, only after repeated issues, or mostly during formal probation or performance review periods.
Is that us as individuals, or what we see in the business?
Good question. I would say within the business, hopefully.
Okay.
Is that right, Ali? Silence is deafening, isn't it?
Yeah. We'll probably share the poll now and the results. There we go. Share the results. So that's quite telling.
Oh,
Wow. Only after repeated issues become noticeable. So nobody's doing it immediately. Very few doing during regular check-ins or reviews. Most people only after repeated issues noticed. Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you for being so honest and open. That's great. But hopefully, things we'll talk about this morning will be able to be put in play. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of my bit now. So key takeaways, hopefully from what we've just been talking about, hire with clarity, getting clearer at the hiring stage is so important. Assessing properly is really key. Set expectation early and acting early. So yeah, because once you leave it too late, your options become much, much more limited. Okay, any questions on what we've been talking about so far? Okay, right, that's fine, no problem. So that's recruitment and the early stage view done. So Rich is going to do now is bring to life this from a legal perspective. What actually happens when these situations aren't handled properly and where the risk really sits.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to guide you through what's happening because we have had a few questions already about how on earth is this all going to pan out. So as Martin mentioned earlier, there is going to be the 6 months new rule coming in. So a little bit of a history here, which I'll deal with because the government has changed things in a particular way for the future. So what used to be the case was you could get a new government coming in and through regulations, they could just decide that the unfair dismissal timeframe was whatever timeframe they wanted it to be. So it switched from 1 year to 2 years. Now it's switching to 6 months. But the Labour government has said that future governments can only change this through an act of parliament. So it's going to make it very difficult to change in the future. In other words, we're going to be with this for a long time. So it's worth getting used to all of these changes, the ones that Martin has mentioned, but also the things that I'm going to discuss as well. So it will apply for new employees and for existing employees. So a date for your diaries, the 1st of July 2026. If you take somebody on that date, then they are going to be in that pipeline. So once you hit the 1st of January 2027, they are going to be the first ones in your new cohort who can start claiming unfair dismissal from that date. So it's quite important to bear in mind that, yes, this will apply for existing employees, but for the new hires, you need to keep that time frame in your diaries too. So I think that takes us over quite comfortably into these statistics that the government has produced. So these were produced in a revised impact assessment that the government did back in January this year. So these are their estimates of how this is going to impact on the system. So you've got here things like people contacting ACAS Early Conciliation to ask to bring claims of unfair dismissal, the kind of pressure that this is going to put on the employment tribunal, and how many of those potential claims and actual claims are actually going to end up being reviewed by a judge. But I've put quite a kind of cautionary statement on the end because we're already seeing claims on the rise even before these changes are coming into play. So I think these are perhaps generous estimates. I think the actual figures are perhaps going to be much worse based on what we're seeing at the moment. So all of that really underlines the importance here of what Martin has already said, and having those processes in place, because those processes are going to reduce these figures quite significantly. Or if they don't, like I said at the beginning, having those processes, having that system in place is going to be safeguarding you in terms of the evidence that you have if you do get taken to an employment tribunal over any of this. I'm not sure if anybody wanted to focus a bit more on the figures, but what we can do is we will just drop in now to kind of how the employment tribunal works, because this can cause a lot of mystique, a lot of confusion around what the employment tribunal will do. So if we just head on to the next slide, we've got a big change coming in terms of what the employment tribunal can do. So compensation for a claim of unfair dismissal. This is where the mystique comes in. And I'm asked this question so many times, both by employers and by employees. What is the employment tribunal actually going to do? So I've broken this down into the compensation that an employment tribunal actually awards. The first, the most frequently awarded compensation is what we call the basic award. So as I've said here, it's roughly equivalent to statutory redundancy pay. We then have the compensatory award. I will come on to that in a second because that is the thing that is changing. And then the last one is what is called an additional award. It isn't automatically applied but it's if things go wrong. So if the employment tribunal has said you need to take this person back because you've unfairly dismissed them, and if they want to come back, which doesn't happen very often, or if an employer delays in paying compensation, then that's your additional award coming up. The compensatory award is where an employee can make the most money in a tribunal claim. So the basic award is something that they would automatically get. The compensatory award is for things like loss of salary, loss of their rights as an employee. It's all of those things about how it's affected them financially. So at the moment, this is capped by employment tribunals at 52 weeks pay or £123 543. So that is going to be removed. And that might not sound like a big thing, but bear in mind the salary and the earnings of the people that you have, particularly those higher up the scale. Because to give you an idea of this, often I will get employees coming to me who are senior executives. And these figures, the 123,543, it makes no sense for them to go to the employment tribunal because they're not going to achieve more than that. So it's in their interests to have settlement discussions with their employer. However, you take that cap away, it's not going to be worthwhile for them to be having as many settlement discussions earlier with their employer. It's going to be perhaps much more worthwhile them trying their luck in terms of what they might get from the employment tribunal, because that cap has been removed or will be removed from the 1st of January next year. So that is a very crucial outlier to keep your eyes on, because that's going to have a big impact moving forward. Were there any questions about that just before we move on? No, that's fine. We'll move on then. So now I'm going to try and make this a bit more practical for you. So in all of this, we've been talking about process, procedure, what to do. I don't know about you, but I don't like stress in my life. I like removing unnecessary stress. So all of these things, contracts that work for your business, please, please, please put those into place, because they're not just a formality. They're there to protect you moving forward. The same with your policies and your procedures. Martin went into fantastic detail on those. So watch the recording back when you get it, because that's going to be incredibly helpful for you. Breathing space with probationary periods. So this point here, I think it's very likely that we're not going to see the 6-month probationary period anymore, because once you've got through that probationary period, the person who has it can claim unfair dismissal anyway. So it's gauging the right probationary period for your business. That could be 3 months, it could be 4 months. What I would say is build in an appropriate amount of time if you need to extend a probationary period, if you're not sure whether that person can meet the targets that you're setting or not. The reason that I say that is you could go to, let's say, a 5-month probationary period extended from 3 or 4 months, but don't let it hit 6, because once it hits 6, they've got the right to claim unfair dismissal anyway. Training managers, I think Martin handled this in great detail. One thing that I was thinking of in particular around difficult conversations or early conversations is the kind of training that you might want to go in for, so that they have, firstly, the confidence and the tools. I think alongside that, it's having open communication channels from managers to HR, and also, I guess, on top of that, ensuring that you're promoting the right people with the right skill set into manager positions in the first place. Now, this next one, giving plenty of notice before the employment ends. So I'm going to deal with this through 2 practical examples, and I'll ask 2 questions. The first one is, if you dismiss somebody on the 31st of December this year, before the change comes into play, do you think they'll be able to claim unfair dismissal?
You wanted people to respond, maybe if people want to just drop a yes or no into the chat, if you're happy to, or put a thumbs up or a thumbs down using the reactions button. Just,
That's fine. If you want me to give the answer, I'll give the answer. So they can. So we have existing case law. Admittedly, it applies to the 2-year rule, but it's equally applicable to the 6-month rule. What this is saying essentially is that it doesn't matter that you've dismissed them the day before. The employment tribunal can build it up to that day that's missing. So they can still bring unfair dismissal claims. Another thing is if you dismiss them a week before and you don't give them notice or pay in lieu of notice, likewise, and I won't ask this one as a question, they can still build up that statutory week of notice that the employee was entitled to, so they can still claim unfair dismissal. The impetus behind all of this is literally be very careful about your notice periods. Don't leave that too late either, because once you do that, you're in the same problem and you've got more claims being brought against you, wrongful dismissal as well as unfair dismissal. So just be very careful that when you are paying someone in lieu of notice or you are giving them notice, you give the right amount of notice, but you're still not triggering that 6-month rule. And then I've got a few suggestions on the next slide as well. Okay, so this first one we have partly dealt with. This is the one with the senior executives who, once the compensatory award is removed, will have much more of a financial incentive in bringing tribunal claims. But there is an incredibly complex side to this in terms of employee benefits. Now, I'm sure that Martin and Ali over the last few years have seen how employee benefits have been used as an incentive to get the right hire. This is the kind of situation where that could backfire. So with the high earners, what we have is if they are being signed up to share plans, share options, long-term incentives, so for example, deferred cash bonuses if they achieve certain targets in their role. If they were to then bring an employment tribunal claim for unfair dismissal, then that's potentially going to backfire on the employer, because this wonderful benefit that it's put in place to encourage the right candidates to accept the role is going to be added to this compensatory award. And in terms of calculating shares and their value, in terms of calculating what a bonus might be worth in the future, that's going to require very detailed expert evidence, which is going to make employment tribunal claims slower than they already are to be resolved. So just be extremely cautious of that as well, because the process at the moment, I mean, it's taking 12 to 18 months as things stand to get to a final hearing in the tribunal. I can see tweaks to the process like this, essentially meaning that that lasts much longer. Could take years, perhaps 3 to 4 years in some cases, to finish a tribunal claim, which is, it's not going to be fun for the people involved because you've got to manage it during all of that time. Coming back to processes. Oh, sorry, Wendy, did you have a question?
Wendy, did you want to ask a question?
No, I'm good, thanks.
No.
So, procedure. Coming back to process again, we have the ACAS Code of Practice on disciplinary and grievance procedures. So, disciplinaries and grievances, as I'm sure you all know, are some of the most frequent ways where people actually exit a company. And what happens in that kind of situation if you don't follow the bare minimum that's set out in the ACAS code? If your employee then goes to an employment tribunal and wins their unfair dismissal claim and you've not followed that ACAS code appropriately, then the employment tribunal can award up to 25% more of the compensatory award on top of what they're already getting. So it can end up being much more expensive simply for trying to shortcut parts of the process. The last thing that I just want to mention about this is the written reasons for dismissal. Under the existing law, Once somebody hits 2 years employment, you need to give them a reason in writing for why their employment is ending. Now, at 6 months, you're going to have to do exactly the same thing. So those processes that were left off until 2 years, they're going to be brought forward to 6 months. It's more paperwork, yes, but it's still something that's going to need to be done. It's something that's not being talked about enough in all of these changes. So I just wanted to flag it because it's going to need to be put into your processes much sooner as well. And that is essentially the legal side of things. I hope I've not scared you about it, but if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to have a chat.
Thank you, Richard. If there are any sort of questions for Richard immediately, then we can deal with those now. But if not, we will just move on to the next.
I do have a quick question, if that's okay, Ali.
Go for it, Wendy.
So if things are at 18 months, it's already a challenge because sometimes your witnesses and people who have written statements and that have left the organisation, or people, the managers might have moved on to other companies. What can you do about that? Is there any recourse that or something you can put in place that you can insist that the person, your team of evidence, as it were, was available to attend tribunals, etc., or is that just you just have to suck it up?
It's not the same as a criminal court, so you can't issue a court order asking somebody in what is a civil court to come and give evidence. What I would say is I would never rely on witnesses to win a tribunal claim for me. I would rely on what the documents prove. So make sure that when they are still with you, they are leaving very detailed notes about what happened, because that's going to be what wins your tribunal claim, not what they say on a witness stand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so just move on to the final couple of slides then, really. So I think what we've sort of heard from today is that this is an opportunity for people to review their recruitment policy, their procedures, and really make sure that they are robust and fair and are going to enable you to select the best candidates using the range of tools that would be available to you, and also so that you are as inclusive as possible to ensure that you get the best candidate. Probation and structuring that probation, planning that probation from the minute you're thinking of taking on that hire is really important. So thinking about what your probation period looks like. I would say even getting those probation meetings in diaries with managers, with the staff member, so that they are planned for the duration of that probation period, whatever that might be. And I think what we've heard from Richard there is really think about the length of your probation to ensure that you have made any key decisions you need to make before any of those key sort of timescales kick in. That's 6 months. So, if you are going to have a 3-month probation period, that gives you the opportunity to extend for a month, possibly 2 months, if an individual needs a bit more time to demonstrate that they're able to do the job, and it still leaves you enough time to give the adequate notice in the fair and legal way. And that needs to be written, and it's all about having those early conversations, isn't it? And training managers, skilling your managers to not be afraid of having those difficult conversations that no one likes having. People often find them difficult, but they needn't be, because it's about being honest. If somebody's not right for the job, if they're not able to do the job to the standard that you want them to do it, then perhaps that is a training issue, and perhaps that is something about your onboarding process and your probation process. But maybe they're just not right for the job, and if so, then the kindest thing to do is really to have an honest conversation about that, and to have that as early as possible. And if you've followed your own process, if you've followed the ACAS guidelines, then you will have a robust and defensible case. But I think for many of us, where we've lived and worked with policies and procedures for a long time, perhaps this is an opportunity to go back and review and make sure that they are fit for purpose and fit for the new legislation that's coming in. Okay, so we do have a few minutes for any questions, if there are any burning questions. And if you're feeling brave, you could ask them. You could take yourself off mute and ask, or drop them into the chat. But I'll just sort of, whilst people are thinking about that, I'll just recap on the questions that we were asked in advance. I think we've probably covered them all off. So, what does a good recruitment process and induction process look like? What's one critical action or piece of advice line managers should take note of to avoid falling foul of these changes? I think it's all about the preparation, isn't it? And that forethought. What does a robust recruitment and selection process look like? What should form part of a recruitment policy? Yeah, I think they're probably, the questions are all variations on a theme. So it doesn't look like we've got any more questions, so we won't drag it out if there aren't. But if you wanted to connect with either Martin or Richard, that offer certainly from Martin and myself, and I'm sure from Richard as well. If there was anything you wanted to pick up outside of the webinar, then if you scan those QR codes, you will get through to individuals' LinkedIn profiles. But just whilst maybe you're thinking about that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and thank you especially to Richard for sharing his really valuable knowledge, and also to Martin. Hope you found the session valuable and insightful, and if you'd like to continue the conversation or explore resources or get involved in upcoming events, then connect with us on LinkedIn or visit the Thrive Team website. Our next webinar, as I said previously, is on the 7th of July, and we'll be joined by Sarah Harvey, and we're exploring the topic of honest performance conversations, and which we think is probably a natural follow-on from today. We will automatically send you a link to register for that session with the follow-up resources from today. As I said, you'll automatically get a copy of the recording and a copy of the slides as well, and Richard's legal handout. So if there's no final questions, just leave it for me to thank you all for attending today. And once again, thank you to Richard and Martin for sharing their knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. That's
you.
brilliant.
Thanks, Wendy. Bye.
See you soon, Wendy.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
Tanya.
bye-bye.
Safe travel.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay.